The city of Lagos was alive, as it always was. Restless, noisy, and overflowing with ambition. Every morning, the streets hummed with the sounds of honking yellow buses, street hawkers balancing trays of goods on their heads, and the endless shuffle of people chasing their daily bread. For Ruby, Lagos wasn't just a city. It was the place where her dreams had taken root. At 29, Ruby was the kind of woman who drew attention without trying. She was beautiful, yes. Her dark brown skin glowed like polished bronze under the sun, her almond-shaped eyes carried warmth, and her smile was the kind that softened even the hardest hearts. But beyond her looks, Ruby carried herself with grace and confidence. She walked into rooms as though she belonged there, and she often did. Ruby worked as an accountant in one of the city's largest firms. Numbers spoke to her like an old friend. Colleagues admired how quickly she could trace errors, balance figures, and make sense of chaos in financial sheets. Her superiors respected her dedication, often handing her the most sensitive accounts to handle. Her job paid her well enough to live comfortably in her two-bedroom apartment in Surulere, dress elegantly, and occasionally indulge herself with little luxuries. Her mornings began with routine, a jog on the quiet street before sunrise, a quick shower, and then her work attire, crisp blouses tucked neatly into pencil skirts, paired with polished heels. She always looked the part of a professional woman who had her life in order. Friends often teased her. "Ruby, you are too picky," Anita, her closest friend in the office, would say over lunch. "How many men have come your way? Bankers, engineers, even that young politician who was chasing you up and down. And you still said no. Are you waiting for an angel to fall from heaven?" Ruby laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Anita, it's not about the money or the status. I want peace. I want a man who respects me, not just one who looks good on paper." Her parents echoed the same worry whenever she visited them. "Ruby, you're not getting younger," her mother reminded her one evening over dinner. "Your job is good, but a woman's life is not complete without a home." Ruby never argued. She simply smiled and changed the subject. Deep down, she knew she wanted marriage. But she also knew she couldn't settle for less. It was at a wedding that everything changed. One bright Saturday afternoon, Ruby attended the ceremony of a former colleague in Ikeja. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and color. Women dazzled in shimmering oso-ebi, while men strutted in agbadas and suits. Ruby, dressed in a flowing gold gown with her hair styled in neat curls, caught more than a few admiring glances as she moved gracefully through the crowd. Outside the hall, luxury cars lined the compound. Among the drivers standing by was Ephraim. He was tall, with a broad chest and a confident stance. His neatly ironed white shirt clung slightly to his frame, and a pair of dark sunglasses dangled from his pocket. He leaned casually on the shiny black SUV he had driven for one of the guests, scanning the crowd with calm, observant eyes. When Ruby passed by, he straightened immediately. "Good afternoon, Ma," he greeted politely, his Edo accent soft but noticeable. Ruby gave a small nod. "Good afternoon." That could have been the end of it, just another fleeting encounter. But later, after the reception, Ruby found herself outside again, waiting for a friend. Ephraim was there, and this time, he seized the chance. "Hope you enjoyed the wedding," he asked, his tone respectful yet warm. Ruby glanced at him, surprised at his boldness. "Yes, I did. It was beautiful." They spoke briefly, about the wedding, about the traffic in Lagos, about nothing in particular. But there was something about Ephraim's manner that lingered. He wasn't pushy, wasn't boastful like many men she had met. He was simple, grounded, and his eyes held sincerity. The conversation might have ended there too, but fate had other plans. Over the following weeks, Ephraim found a way to keep in touch. A mutual friend had shared Ruby's number when he asked innocently if he could check up on her. At first, Ruby was skeptical. He was a driver, after all. Not the type of man her friends or family would expect her to be with. But he was persistent in the gentlest way. He called to ask about her day. He sent text messages reminding her to eat. When he was in Lagos for work, he carved out time to see her. Sometimes he brought small gifts, fruits, a pair of earrings, even a novel she had once mentioned she wanted to read. Anita was shocked when she found out. Ruby, wait. You mean you're actually talking to that driver? Out of all the men in Lagos. Ruby laughed. Anita, don't look down on him. He's hardworking, and he treats me with respect. Isn't that what we pray for? What began as casual conversations grew into long discussions about life, family, and the future. Ephraim opened up about his dreams. He had no university degree, but he worked with wealthy clients who trusted him. He was saving to build a small transport business of his own someday. Ruby admired his ambition, his sense of responsibility, and his grounded faith. Months passed, and Ruby found herself looking forward to his calls, to his visits. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the man she had been waiting for. A year later, Ephraim proposed. It wasn't in a grand hotel or under sparkling chandeliers. It was in Benin, outside his modest flat, when Ruby visited him one evening. The compound was quiet, lit only by the pale glow of streetlights. Ephraim knelt down on one knee, holding a simple silver ring. Ruby, he said, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. I may not have riches to shower on you, but I have honesty, I have respect, and I have love. Will you marry me? Ruby's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled up in her eyes. She thought of all the men who had come her way, men with wealth but arrogance, men with charm but no character. And here was Ephraim, simple, grounded, but genuine. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Ephraim, I will. He slipped the ring on her finger, and she leaned into his arms. The wedding was modest but filled with joy. Her colleagues in Lagos contributed generously, her parents gave their blessings, and Ephraim's family welcomed her warmly into theirs. As the choir sang and vows were exchanged, Ruby felt a surge of happiness. She was ready to begin a new chapter, ready to build a home with the man she had chosen. On the morning she left Lagos for good, Ruby stood on the balcony of her apartment one last time. She looked out at the familiar streets, the busy life she had known, the career she had built. Her heart squeezed with emotion. Goodbye, Lagos, she whispered. Thank you for everything. She turned, picked up her small suitcase, and walked out. Ephraim was waiting by the car, smiling proudly as he opened the door for her. Ruby smiled back, her heart full of hope. She believed she was stepping into a brighter future. What she didn't know was that the road ahead would test her strength, her patience, and her very identity as a woman. The move to Edo was not a surprise to Ruby. She had known from the start that marriage meant leaving Lagos, and she had prepared herself mentally. But it was only after the wedding, when the celebrations had ended and the well-wishers had returned to their lives, that the weight of the change sank in. The first Monday morning in her new city, Ruby woke up instinctively at 5:30 a.m., just as she used to in Lagos. The habit was ingrained from years of balancing traffic and office deadlines. She showered quickly, dressed neatly, and stepped into the living room. Then it struck her. There was nowhere to go. No office waiting. No spreadsheets to review. No colleagues expecting her at the conference table. The silence pressed heavily on her. Ephraim was already gone for work, leaving behind only the sound of his car fading down the road. Ruby stood in the small living room, staring at the clock on the wall. She felt misplaced, like a bird that had been clipped mid-flight. Still, she refused to give in to the emptiness. She ironed the curtains, scrubbed the floor until it gleamed, and cooked a meal that could last Ephraim for 2 days. When he returned, she smiled brightly and served him, determined to prove she was a good wife. But as days turned into weeks, the quietness of her new life became harder to bear. Ruby began sending out applications, first to banks, then to small accounting firms, then to schools where she thought she could at least teach mathematics. She dressed in her best clothes, carried her file, and walked the streets of Benin with confidence. But each attempt ended the same way. We'll get back to you. Weeks passed. No one ever did. Her old Lagos colleagues occasionally called to check on her. "How's married life?" they teased. Ruby laughed and gave vague answers. She didn't tell them about the rejections. She didn't tell them how much she missed her office desk, the rush of deadlines, the sense of purpose. At home, Ephraim was kind at first. He encouraged her lightly whenever she returned disappointed. "Don't worry, Ruby," he would say. "Your time will come." His words soothed her then, but as the months dragged on, she noticed he never followed up, never offered to connect her to anyone he knew. It was as if her career dreams belonged only to her, not to their marriage. Then came the news of her pregnancy. Ruby sat in the hospital chair, staring at the test result in disbelief. A part of her heart swelled with joy, but another part trembled with fear. She hadn't secured work yet, hadn't established herself in Edo. Now, a baby was on the way. When she told Ephraim, he smiled and embraced her. "This is wonderful, Ruby. God has blessed us early." And just like that, the search for work stopped. Her body grew heavy, her energy consumed by the demands of pregnancy. By the time their daughter arrived, a tiny wrinkled bundle with loud cries, Ruby's days and nights were filled with nothing but feeding, rocking, and endless chores. It was only after the child turned 1 that Ruby dared to think about her career again. She picked up her file, updated her CV, and began walking the streets once more. But by then, her shoes had worn thin, her dresses no longer as polished as they once were. She still carried herself with dignity, but she could see how employers looked past her with disinterest. Then the second pregnancy came, unplanned, catching her before she could gain momentum. And after that, the third. Within 5 years of marriage, Ruby had 3 children and no job. The weight of dependency pressed on her chest. Every month, she waited for Ephraim's allowance to buy food. When she asked for more, to replace worn-out clothes or to buy shoes, his tone began to change. "What do you need that for?" he asked one evening as she shyly requested money for a new wrapper. "You're at home all day. Is it another man you're dressing for?" Ruby's throat tightened, but she said nothing. She turned back to the kitchen, blinking away tears. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she sat at the edge of the mattress, whispering prayers under her breath. "God, I know you see me. Don't let this be my end. Open a way for me." But the heavens remained silent. Ruby's life settled into a rhythm, but not the kind she had dreamed of. Her mornings were no longer filled with the rush of traffic and office chatter. Instead, they began with the cries of children demanding food, followed by endless laundry, cooking, and cleaning. Sometimes, while hanging clothes in the backyard, she would pause, gazing at the sky, and remember the woman she used to be. The polished accountant who once held presentations in Lagos, who once had her own money, who once walked into boutiques and picked clothes without asking anyone for permission. That woman felt like a stranger now. When she brought up the idea of starting a small business, Ephraim always had a reason to dismiss it. "Ruby, we don't have spare money right now," he said one afternoon, folding his arms across his chest. "But I don't need much," Ruby pleaded gently. "Even a small shop with provisions. I can manage it while the children are in school." "Later," Ephraim replied, his eyes already fixed on the television. The word cut her more deeply each time he said it. Later, later, later. Later never came. Meanwhile, the allowance he gave her was barely enough. She stretched it to cover food for herself and the children, but there was nothing left for her own needs. Her clothes wore out. Her shoes cracked. Her once polished hair became dry and untidy because salon visits were now a luxury. One Saturday evening, as she stood in front of the mirror tying her scarf, she caught sight of herself. The reflection startled her. Her once glowing skin had grown dull, her eyes tired. Her hands, once manicured, were now rough from endless chores. "Is this really me?" she whispered. That night, she gathered courage and asked Ephraim again. "My husband, please, I need something for clothes. Even 1 or 2 wrappers. The ones I have are old." Ephraim glanced at her, his expression flat. "Ruby, what do you need wrappers for? Are you looking for another husband?" The words hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in his presence. She turned quietly and walked into the children's room, where she sat until her heart stopped trembling. Ephraim didn't stop there. Gradually, he stopped showing interest in her completely. He returned home late, claiming he was tired. Sometimes, he skipped meals she prepared. He spent longer hours outside, and Ruby couldn't ignore the scent of women's perfume on his shirts. She noticed the changes but swallowed her pain. She prayed instead. At night, when he snored beside her, Ruby knelt quietly by the bed. Lord, I don't know how much more I can take, but I trust you. Please, don't let my life end like this. Her prayers were filled with desperation, but her faith was the only strength she had left. In the compound, the neighbors began to notice her transformation. Some pitied her, others mocked. That Lagos girl has become like us, she once overheard two women whispering. She thought marriage was enjoyment. See her now, always looking tired. Ruby forced herself to ignore their words, but they sank into her heart like stones. Her children were her only joy. They clung to her, innocent and unaware of their mother's silent battles. She made sure their uniforms were always clean, their homework supervised, their meals prepared with love. When they hugged her tightly, she felt life return to her veins. Yet, when they slept, loneliness swallowed her whole. She often sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the clock, waiting for Ephraim to return. Sometimes he came at midnight, drunk or smelling of perfume. Other times, he crept in silently, pretending to be too tired for conversation. Ruby never shouted, never accused. She endured in silence, hoping one day things would change. But deep inside, something was breaking. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange, Ruby sat outside with her youngest child asleep in her lap. The compound was alive with chatter, neighbors discussing politics, children chasing one another, women pounding yam in wooden mortars. Ruby listened absently, her mind far away. She remembered how, in Lagos, evenings had been different. She had once sat on her balcony overlooking a busy street, sipping juice after work, scrolling through her phone to check emails. She had once laughed with colleagues over dinner in restaurants, dressed in fine clothes, her hair neatly styled. Now, her evenings were filled with dust, exhaustion, and silence. That night, when Ephraim returned, Ruby decided to try once more. "My husband," she began softly, "I've been thinking. Maybe I can start small. Even if it's just selling drinks and snacks in front of the house. It will ease your burden. Please, support me with a little." Ephraim barely looked at her. He kicked off his shoes and sank into a chair. "Ruby," I said later, "why are you disturbing me every time? Isn't it enough that I give you money for food? What else do you want? Clothes business. Are you not content?" Ruby's lips trembled, but she kept her voice calm. "It's not about me alone. It's about the children too. I don't want them to lack." Ephraim's eyes hardened. "Are you trying to tell me I'm not providing? If you want so much, maybe you should go back to Lagos and work with your people there." The words struck like lightning. For a moment, Ruby couldn't breathe. She lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. Later that night, after Ephraim had fallen asleep, Ruby stepped into the living room. She sat on the worn-out sofa, staring at the darkness. Her hands shook as she whispered, "God, how did I get here? From a woman with a good job, respect, and beauty, to this? Lord, if you still see me, please remember me." The tears came, hot and unrelenting. She cried until her chest ached, until her body grew weak. In the following weeks, Ruby noticed Ephraim growing colder. He returned home later and later, sometimes skipping nights altogether. Rumors trickled into the compound that he was seen with other women, spending freely, laughing carelessly. Ruby said nothing. She bore her pain in silence, clinging to her children and her faith. Her appearance changed more with each passing day. Her hair remained tied in old scarves. Her dresses sagged at the seams. She moved about with the heaviness of someone much older than her age. Friends from Lagos who managed to reach her by phone were stunned at her voice. It had lost its cheer, replaced by a quiet, tired tone. "Ruby, are you okay?" Anita once asked over the phone. "I'm fine," Ruby lied quickly. "Marriage is just busy. You know how it is." But she knew Anita would never understand. Ruby's world had shrunk to 4 walls, 3 children, and a husband who no longer looked at her. Yet, in all of it, she refused to curse her fate. Each morning, she woke up early, prepared her children for school, and prayed over them. Each evening, she tucked them into bed with stories, even if her own heart was breaking. She told herself that someday, somehow, things would change. For now, she lived only on hope, and on the belief that God had not forgotten her, even if the world seemed to have done so. What Ruby did not know was that her prayer was already stirring an answer. Her miracle was closer than she thought. Focused on her children, pouring every ounce of her strength into them. She became the kind of mother who could stretch a little into plenty. With 500 naira, she cooked meals that lasted days. She patched their clothes when they tore, braided her daughter's hair neatly with cheap rubber bands, and taught them alphabets and numbers herself when money for extra lessons wasn't there. Her children adored her. They clung to her skirt, called her Mummy, Mummy, and filled the compound with their laughter. For them, Ruby smiled, even when her heart was breaking. But her own reflection told another story. Her wrappers grew faded, her blouses lost shape, her once fine shoes cracked until the straps dangled. Her hair often remained hidden beneath scarves because there was no money for salon visits. The beautiful Lagos accountant who once turned heads in meetings had become a weary housewife whom neighbors barely noticed. One afternoon, as she carried her youngest from the market, a woman she knew from university gasped at the sight of her. "Ruby, is this you?" the woman asked, her eyes wide. Ruby forced a smile. "Yes, it's me." The woman shook her head slowly. "You were one of the finest girls in our set. What happened?" Ruby swallowed hard and adjusted her scarf. "Life happened," she whispered. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay beside her children, staring at the ceiling, Ephraim snoring lightly in the other room. Tears slid down her cheeks. She prayed silently, her lips trembling. "God, you see me. You know I'm not lazy. You know I'm not wasteful. Please, open a door for me. Even if it's small, Lord, just so I can stand on my own feet again." But her prayers seemed to vanish into silence. Meanwhile, Ephraim grew distant. He provided only for food, and even that was inconsistent. When Ruby asked for anything beyond feeding, he dismissed her. One evening she dared to ask gently, "My husband, please, I need something for clothes. Everything I have is wearing out." Ephraim's response was cruel. He smirked and said, "Clothes? Shoes? What do you need those for? Are you trying to attract another man?" Ruby froze. She stared at him, her mouth open, but no words came. His laughter rang in her ears like mockery. From that day she stopped asking. But silence did not protect her heart. Ephraim began to spend longer hours outside, often returning late at night. Sometimes, the scent of perfume clung to his shirt. Sometimes, lipstick smudges stained his collar. Ruby noticed, but she said nothing. Confrontation felt useless. She became older overnight. Her once bright eyes dulled, her laughter disappeared, her beauty dimmed under the weight of neglect. Neighbors in the compound whispered about her transformation. "That Lagos girl has changed," one woman said to another. "She used to shine. Now look at her, she's just like us." Ruby pretended not to hear. She carried her basin of washed clothes, entered her room, and shut the door. Inside, she wept quietly. Yet through it all, she never lost her faith. Every dawn before the children woke, she knelt to pray. Every night after they slept, she whispered scriptures to herself. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning," she repeated over and over, even when joy felt like a stranger. Motherhood had cost her her career, her independence, and her beauty. But it had not stolen her will to survive. Deep down, Ruby believed, perhaps foolishly, perhaps faithfully, that God would remember her someday. She did not know when or how, but she held on. And though Ephraim overlooked her, mocked her, and poured his money into other women, Ruby's heart remained steadfast. She told herself, one day, things will change. One day, my prayers will be answered. What she did not realize was that her day of remembrance was closer than she thought. The years that followed tested Ruby in ways she had never imagined. Marriage had stripped away not just her independence but also her dignity. The once elegant accountant who carried herself with pride was now a shadow of that woman. Her neighbors saw it. The streets saw it. Even Ephraim, though he pretended not to, knew it. Ruby's clothes told her story. The vibrant gowns she had once worn in Lagos had grown faded, their seams weak. Her shoes cracked until the soles threatened to peel away completely. At first, she tried to keep appearances, sewing and patching quietly, but after a while, she gave up. What was the point of patching when her husband dismissed her every time she asked for help? Her hair was often tied in the same old scarf, hiding the once lustrous curls she had proudly styled. A salon visit had become a luxury she couldn't dream of. The mirror in her room stood as her enemy. Whenever she looked into it, she saw an older, worn version of herself staring back. It was easier to avoid it altogether. The neighbors in the compound noticed the change too. Women who had once admired her during her visits to Benin now whispered about her openly. She used to shine when she first came, one said. See her now, she looks older than her years. Another added, what do you expect? Her husband spends all his money outside. He gives nothing to her. Ruby heard the whispers. Sometimes they stung, sometimes they numbed. But she never replied. She carried her basin of clothes, balanced her children's school bags, and went about her duties as though deaf. It was the children that kept her alive. Their voices, their hugs, their small laughter. Those were the fragments of joy that stitched her broken heart together. Every morning, she prepared their uniforms with care. Even when money for school shoes was lacking, she polished their worn ones until they shone. She packed their lunchboxes with whatever she could manage, adding fruits when she could, even if it meant going without for herself. But each sacrifice came at a cost. Ruby grew thinner. Her eyes carried shadows. Her back bent slightly from years of bending, carrying, scrubbing. She was no longer just tired, she was weary in her bones. Ephraim, meanwhile, lived as though he had no responsibilities. He returned home late at night, often drunk or smelling of another woman's perfume. There were days he carried expensive gifts into the compound, perfumes, wigs, even jewelry, but none of it was for Ruby. The neighbors whispered, and Ruby pretended not to notice. Once, a neighbor's teenage daughter saw Ephraim dropping off a young woman in front of the compound. The girl wore gold earrings and carried a brand new handbag. Ruby was in the backyard, scrubbing clothes, when the gossip reached her ears. Your husband has money for other women, the girl giggled cruelly. But look at you washing clothes with bare hands. Ruby froze, the soap sliding from her fingers. For a moment, shame burned her entire body. She wanted to scream, to throw the bucket of water at the girl, to run to Ephraim and confront him. But she didn't. She lowered her gaze, picked up the soap, and continued scrubbing. That night, she cried silently into her pillow. My God, she whispered. What did I do to deserve this? Am I not the same Ruby who once had respect, who once had dignity? Lord, remember me. Her prayers became her lifeline. Every dawn, before the children stirred, Ruby knelt in the corner of her room. She prayed not just for herself but for her children, for their future, for strength to endure another day. She read psalms out loud, letting the words soak into her weary spirit. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Yet, each day seemed harder than the last. Her friends from Lagos drifted further away. At first, they called, eager to check on her new married life. Ruby answered with half-truths, too ashamed to admit her reality. Over time, the calls reduced until they stopped altogether. She couldn't bring herself to reach out either. How could she tell them that the Ruby they once admired had been reduced to a beggar in her own home? Even her family noticed the difference during occasional visits. Her mother once held her hand, her eyes full of worry. "Ruby, you've changed. You look tired. Are you sure you're okay?" Ruby forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mama. Marriage is just demanding." But inside she was breaking. Ephraim no longer cared to hide his ways. Sometimes he walked into the house, reeking of alcohol, tossing a few crumpled notes on the table. "That's for food," he muttered before collapsing into bed. Ruby picked up the money silently, already calculating how to stretch it across days. Other times, he returned with a smirk, mocking her subtly. "Ruby, you used to be fine in Lagos. What happened to you? Look at yourself now." Those words cut deeper than knives. She bit her lips until they bled, refusing to give him the satisfaction of tears in his presence. Still, Ruby remained faithful. She clung to her children, she clung to prayer, and she clung to the faint hope that her story would not end in despair. One late night, after tucking her children into bed, Ruby stepped outside. The compound was quiet, the moon hanging heavy in the sky. She sat on a wooden stool, her hands clasped tightly together. "God, if you are still there, please don't let me waste away. I have served, I have sacrificed. Show me mercy. Open a door for me. Please." Her voice cracked, her body trembling. The silence around her seemed endless, but something in her spirit refused to let go. She believed, even against all odds, that one day her prayers would be answered. And though she could not see it yet, her day of remembrance was drawing closer. His insults sharpen, and he grows colder at home. By the 7th year of Ruby's marriage, Ephraim no longer pretended. The man who had once wooed her with promises of respect and partnership now behaved as though she didn't exist. He played his role as father loosely, dropping money for food when he felt like it, occasionally lifting the children into his arms when neighbors watched, but his true life was lived outside the home. It began subtly. Longer hours at work. More late nights. The occasional strange perfume lingering on his shirts. At first, Ruby told herself not to overthink it. She was a wife, not a detective. But soon, the whispers grew too loud to ignore. One afternoon, while Ruby washed clothes in the backyard, two women in the compound gossiped loudly nearby. "Ephraim was seen at the hotel again yesterday," one said, pounding yam as she spoke. "With that fair girl?" the other asked. "Yes, the one he bought the new phone for." Ruby's hands froze in the soapy water. Heat rushed to her face, but she kept her head bent, scrubbing as though she hadn't heard. Later that evening, Ephraim returned home smelling of alcohol and cologne. Ruby served him his meal quietly. He ate without a word, then stretched on the bed and snored loudly until morning. This became the rhythm of their lives. When he gave her money, it was barely enough to feed the children. When she asked for more, he snapped. "Ruby, stop acting like I'm made of gold. Manage what you have." But she knew he was lying. Neighbors spoke of how he was seen spraying cash at parties, buying drinks for friends, and handing expensive gifts to other women. One day, Ruby saw it with her own eyes. She was returning from the market with her children when she spotted Ephraim across the road. He stood by his car, laughing with a young woman dressed in tight jeans and a bright top. The girl leaned into him, giggling, as he pressed money into her hand. Ruby's heart clenched. She gripped her children's hands tightly and quickened her pace, praying they hadn't noticed. That night, she didn't ask questions. She didn't shout or cry. She simply lay beside her children until they slept, then slipped outside and knelt in the cool night air. "Lord," she whispered, "my husband has forgotten me, but please don't forget me. If I have no one else, let me at least have you." Her prayers became more desperate as the years dragged on. Ruby stopped expecting tenderness from Ephraim. Gone were the days when he asked about her dreams or admired her beauty. Now, when he looked at her, it was often with irritation. One evening, after she had served him food, he stared at her for a long moment. Then he smirked. "Ruby, you've changed. You don't even look like the girl I married. Look at your hair. Look at your clothes. You're like an old woman already." The words sank into her soul like stones. She wanted to scream, to remind him that it was his neglect that had stripped her shine, that she had once been admired by many. But instead, she turned away, blinking back tears. The compound became her silent witness. Women mocked her behind her back. "The Lagos girl has become nothing," they sneered. Children pointed at her worn wrappers and laughed. Some neighbors pitied her, but pity only deepened her shame. Even her children began to notice. Her eldest once asked innocently, "Mummy, why doesn't Daddy stay with us? Why doesn't he buy you nice things like other daddies buy for their wives?" Ruby forced a smile, patting the child's head. "Don't worry, my dear. Daddy is just busy." But when she was alone, she broke down. Her faith was all she had left. She poured herself into prayers, into scriptures, into late-night vigils whispered silently so as not to wake the children. She prayed for strength, for provision, for dignity. She prayed that God would one day show her that her sacrifice was not in vain. Her body bore the signs of neglect. Her hands grew calloused, her face lined with worry. The neighbors called her Mama 3, as though her identity had been reduced to nothing but her children. Yet, even in her lowest state, Ruby remained graceful. She never insulted Ephraim, never cursed him, never allowed bitterness to poison her heart. She chose silence and faith over anger, even when he deserved none of her kindness. It was this silence that puzzled some. "Ruby, why do you endure?" Mama Osoto, the elderly woman next door, asked her one day. "Your husband treats you like dust, but you never shout, never fight. Why?" Ruby smiled faintly, her eyes tired. "Because I believe God will fight for me." Mama Osoto shook her head, muttering, "I pray he remembers you quickly, my daughter." And though Ruby didn't know it yet, that prayer was already stirring. The longer Ephraim flaunted his double life, the more Ruby's story spread. Some mocked, some pitied, but everyone noticed. And slowly, Ruby reached the point where she no longer prayed for Ephraim to change. She prayed only for God to change her life. For years she had been neglected, insulted, and abandoned in plain sight. But Ruby didn't know that soon, her silence and faith would open a door no man could shut. The sun was unforgiving that afternoon, beating down on the busy streets of Benin. Ruby walked slowly, a basket of food items balanced on her arm, her youngest child tugging at her wrapper. Her steps were heavy, her body tired. The market had drained her, not just of energy but also of spirit. Every coin had to be calculated, every vegetable bargained for. Even then, the money Ephraim had given her was barely enough. Her faded wrapper clung to her legs, damp with sweat. Her slippers, worn thin, slapped against the hot pavement with each step. People brushed past her, some with hurried strides, others with baskets bigger than hers. Ruby kept her eyes down, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. She hated the thought of being recognized by someone from her past. But fate had its own plan. As Ruby neared the junction, a sleek black SUV slowed beside her. The tinted window rolled down, and a familiar voice called out, "Ruby. Ruby, is that you?" Ruby froze. Her heart skipped. She turned slowly, blinking against the sun. From inside the car, a woman leaned forward, her face radiant, her clothes elegant. At first Ruby thought her eyes deceived her. But no, it was Jane. Jane, her old course mate from the university. The lively, ambitious girl who had always talked about traveling abroad, who had vanished from Nigeria shortly after graduation. Ruby's mouth went dry. She couldn't speak. Jane stepped out of the car, heels clicking against the pavement. She stared at Ruby, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My God, Ruby. Is this really you?" Ruby swallowed hard, her lips trembling. She forced a smile, but it was weak, fragile. Jane walked closer, scanning her from head to toe. The faded wrapper, the cracked slippers, the basket of cheap groceries, the scarf tied loosely over unkempt hair. "What happened to you?" Jane asked, her voice breaking. "We all knew you as the fine, intelligent Ruby, the girl with a good job, the girl who always carried herself with pride. How did this happen?" Ruby's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but the words refused to come. Her chest heaved, and then suddenly the dam broke. Tears poured down her face. She covered her mouth with her hand, ashamed, but the sobs refused to stop. Jane gasped and quickly wrapped her arms around her. "Oh, Ruby. My dear Ruby." The traffic around them continued, people passing by. But in that moment, Ruby didn't care who saw. Years of silent suffering spilled out in hot tears against Jane's shoulder. When Ruby finally pulled back, Jane held her firmly by the arms. "Listen to me," she said with urgency. "I don't know everything yet, but I can see your suffering. Here," she reached into her purse and pulled out a card and a folded wad of cash. She pressed them into Ruby's hands. "This is my card. That's my address too. I'm back in Benin now. I want you to come to my house tomorrow. Promise me you will. We'll talk properly. Don't argue, don't refuse. Just come." Ruby sniffled, staring down at the money in her hand. It had been years since anyone had handed her cash freely, without mockery attached. She wanted to refuse, pride tugging at her heart, but her children's faces flashed in her mind. She nodded slowly. "I'll come," she whispered. Jane smiled warmly, brushing the tears from Ruby's cheeks. "Good. Tomorrow then. You're not alone, Ruby. Not anymore." With that, Jane slipped back into her SUV and drove off, leaving Ruby standing stunned at the roadside, clutching the card and the money as though they were treasures. She looked down at them again, tears brimming anew. For the first time in years, hope flickered inside her chest. A fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. That evening, Ruby cooked dinner with unusual energy. She hummed softly as she stirred the pot, her children watching curiously. "Mummy, why are you happy today?" her eldest asked. Ruby smiled, wiping her eyes quickly. "Because God has remembered me, my dear. God has remembered me." When Ephraim returned that night, he didn't notice the glow in her eyes. He ate his food silently, grunted, and fell asleep. Ruby didn't mind. For once, his presence didn't weigh her down. Her heart was fixed on tomorrow. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Ruby lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She held Jane's card in her hand, running her fingers over the embossed letters again and again. "Lord," she whispered, "is this the door I've been praying for? If it is, give me courage. Don't let me miss this chance." And as sleep finally claimed her, Ruby's heart carried something it had not held in years: expectation. The morning after her encounter with Jane, Ruby rose before dawn. She bathed her children, prepared their simple breakfast of pap and akara, and walked them to school. All the while, her mind buzzed with anticipation. Jane's card rested safely in her purse, and each time she touched it, a surge of courage filled her. She returned home, bathed quickly, and dressed carefully. She tied her hair neatly, ironed her least faded wrapper, and wore the only pair of shoes that hadn't completely given way. She looked in the mirror, adjusting her scarf. For the first time in years, she felt nervous. Not the nervousness of fear, but of possibility. By mid-morning, she stood before the tall gates of Jane's house. The building was magnificent. White walls, flowers neatly trimmed, 2 security men stationed at the entrance. Ruby's breath caught in her throat. She had once lived comfortably in Lagos, but this was different. This was wealth she had never imagined. The guards let her in after confirming her name. As she stepped into the compound, she saw Jane waiting at the doorway, her smile warm and inviting. "Ruby, you came," Jane said, hurrying forward to embrace her. Ruby clung to her, tears threatening again. I almost didn't, she whispered. But I couldn't stop thinking about your words. Jane led her inside. The living room was expansive, with polished tiles, leather sofas, and paintings that gleamed under soft lighting. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, glittering like captured sunlight. Ruby felt small, but Jane's kindness soothed her. They sat, and after a few moments of silence, Jane spoke gently. Ruby, yesterday broke my heart. I need you to tell me everything. Don't hold back. What happened? How did you end up like this? At first, Ruby hesitated. Shame weighed heavily on her tongue. But Jane's eyes, steady and compassionate, gave her strength. And so, Ruby began. She spoke of her life in Lagos, her good job, her independence. She spoke of meeting Ephraim, their courtship, and her decision to leave everything behind for marriage. Her voice trembled as she described her years in Edo, the endless job applications that yielded nothing, the pregnancies that came back to back, the slow erosion of her beauty, her dignity, and her joy. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted Ephraim's neglect, how he mocked her when she asked for money, how he accused her of wanting another man when she begged for clothes, how he spoiled other women while leaving her and the children with crumbs. Jane listened in silence, her fists clenched, her jaw tight. When Ruby finished, the room was thick with emotion. For a long moment, Jane said nothing. Then she leaned forward, her voice shaking with controlled anger. Ruby, you mean to tell me this is what you've been living through all these years? You, a brilliant woman, a certified accountant, reduced to begging for wrappers? And Ephraim, that man you left Lagos for. This is how he treats you. Ruby wiped her tears and lowered her head. I kept praying, Jane. I believed God would remember me. I didn't know how, but I held on. Jane took her hands firmly. Ruby, God has remembered you. And I refuse to watch you waste away any longer. She stood abruptly and reached for her phone. With quick fingers, she dialed a number. Brother, she said sharply when the line connected. I need a favor. There's someone I want you to employ. Don't ask me questions. Just trust me. She's an accountant, sharp, qualified, disciplined. Her name is Ruby. Yes, she's here with me. I'll send her CV immediately. Position. Anything in your department that matches her skill. In fact, make her the company accountant if possible. She deserves it. Ruby's mouth fell open. She sat frozen, hardly believing what she was hearing. Jane ended the call and turned back to her with determination in her eyes. It's done. You'll have an interview in a few days. But trust me, you're already in. My brother is a director in the oil company here. They need someone like you, and I've made sure you'll get your chance. Ruby's chest heaved as she struggled to breathe. Jane, I don't even know what to say. After everything, after all these years of praying. Don't say anything, Jane interrupted softly. Just prepare yourself. This is your new beginning. Ruby broke down again, sobbing uncontrollably. But these tears were different. They were not of pain or despair, but of relief, of hope reborn. She fell to her knees right there in Jane's living room, lifting her hands. Thank you, Lord, she cried. Thank you for remembering me. You didn't forget me. Thank you. Jane knelt beside her, holding her. You deserve this, Ruby. More than you know. They prayed together, their voices mingling with tears, and for the first time in nearly a decade, Ruby felt the chains around her heart loosen. When she left Jane's house later that afternoon, she walked with her head higher, her steps lighter. The streets no longer felt as heavy. The card in her purse had led her to more than just a reunion. It had led her to the doorway of transformation. That evening, Ruby cooked with a joy she had forgotten she could feel. She hummed as she set the table, her children watching in wonder. Mummy, why are you happy today again? Her eldest asked. Ruby smiled, tears in her eyes. Because, my child, God has remembered us. Ephraim came home late, as usual. He ate silently, barely glancing at her. But Ruby no longer sought his approval. She no longer cared about his silence. Her heart was already anchored in a new hope, one Ephraim could neither give nor take away. That night, as she lay in bed, Ruby closed her eyes with a smile. For the first time in years, she slept deeply, without tears. Her miracle had begun. 3 days after her visit to Jane's house, Ruby stood nervously in the lobby of the oil company. The tall glass building gleamed under the morning sun, a symbol of power and wealth. Men in suits and women in crisp skirts moved briskly across the marble floors. Ruby held her file tightly to her chest, her palms damp with sweat. She had not been in such an environment for nearly a decade. For a moment, self-doubt whispered in her ears. What if I've forgotten everything? What if I'm not good enough anymore? But then she remembered Jane's words. You're already in. Just prepare yourself. When her name was called, she walked into the boardroom. 3 interviewers sat before her, their eyes sharp but not unkind. They asked her questions about financial statements, auditing procedures, tax regulations. At first, Ruby's voice trembled, but soon her old confidence returned. Numbers flowed from her lips like second nature, her answers precise and detailed. The interviewers exchanged approving glances. After barely 40 minutes, the lead interviewer smiled. Mrs. Ruby Ephraim, welcome to the company. You'll resume as our new senior accountant. Ruby's breath caught. I got the job. Yes, the man said firmly. You'll receive your appointment letter by the end of today. Report back on Monday. Tears filled her eyes. She bowed slightly, her voice breaking. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. When she stepped out of the building, the world seemed brighter. She looked up at the sky, tears streaming freely. Thank you, Lord, she whispered. You remembered me. The blessings multiplied quickly. By the end of her first week, she was handed the keys to a company car. Sleek, polished, and new. Within a month, she was offered company housing, a spacious 3-bedroom flat with modern fittings. And her salary? It was 10 times what Ephraim earned. Ruby's transformation was swift. She went to the salon, trimmed her hair into a neat bob, and treated it until it shone again. She bought new clothes, professional suits for work, elegant gowns for church, casual wear for outings with her children. The tired, faded woman disappeared. In her place stood the Ruby of old, confident, radiant, beautiful. Neighbors noticed. Ah, Mama 3 has changed, one exclaimed. Where did she get money from? Another whispered. She's shining again. Just look at her. Ruby walked past their whispers with dignity. She no longer cared for gossip. Her children noticed too. They clapped when she drove them to school in her car for the first time. Mummy has a big car, they shouted proudly. They boasted to their friends, their little chests puffed with joy. Ephraim noticed most of all. At first, he pretended not to care. But when Ruby began to leave for work in her neatly pressed suits, driving her company car, returning in the evenings with groceries and gifts for the children, he grew restless. He watched as she paid school fees without asking him, as she bought new clothes for the children, as she handled household expenses with ease. It dawned on him, his wife now earned more than him, far more. Ruby, however, did not flaunt it. She never insulted him, never threw her success in his face. She simply minded her business, focused on her job, and poured her energy into her children. But her silence burned him more than words could have. He would return home late, expecting to find a weary woman waiting. Instead, he found a glowing Ruby, busy helping the children with homework or preparing a meal with music humming in the background. She no longer asked him for anything, not even money for food. The neighbors saw the shift too. Once they had mocked Ruby for her faded wrappers. Now they admired her elegance, whispering about how beautiful she looked, how confident she had become again. Some pitied Ephraim, others mocked him quietly. Ephraim himself grew bitter. He regretted every insult, every neglect, every careless word he had ever thrown at her. But pride kept him from apologizing. Instead, he sank deeper into his vices, chasing other women, drinking heavily, wasting money he barely had. Ruby noticed, but she didn't confront him. She had no energy for quarrels. Her focus was clear: her children, her career, and her God. At work she excelled. Her supervisors praised her diligence. Her colleagues respected her expertise. She felt alive again, her mind sharp, her skills valued. Each paycheck reminded her of how far she had come, from a forgotten wife begging for wrappers to a respected professional with influence. One Friday evening, as she drove home from work, Ruby pulled to the side of the road and parked for a moment. She sat in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Lord," she whispered, "you lifted me from the dust. You gave me beauty for ashes. Thank you. Thank you." Her phone buzzed with a message from Jane. "Proud of you, my sister. You deserve this." Ruby smiled through her tears. She sent a reply. "You were the hand God used. I will never forget you." That night, as she tucked her children into bed, Ruby kissed each of them on the forehead. "Mummy is here," she whispered, "and she will never fail you again." The children hugged her tightly, their faces glowing with pride. In the quiet of her room, Ruby looked into the mirror once more. For years, she had avoided it. Now, she smiled at her reflection. Her eyes sparkled again, her skin glowed, her posture was strong. She was back, not just as Ruby the accountant, but as Ruby the woman God had remembered. And though Ephraim lived under the same roof, his presence no longer defined her. Her dignity, her joy, her identity had been restored. Ruby's new life unfolded like a sunrise after a long night. With each passing month, she grew stronger, more radiant, more secure. Her job as senior accountant in the oil company gave her not only financial stability but also respect. She walked into the office each morning in tailored suits, her head held high, her confidence unshaken. Colleagues admired her professionalism, and her superiors quickly entrusted her with sensitive projects. But Ruby never allowed her success to make her proud. She remained humble, greeting the janitors as warmly as she did the executives. She worked late when needed, always striving for excellence. She knew she wasn't just working for herself. She was working for her children, for their future, for the restoration of everything she had lost. Her home life transformed too. The children no longer went to schools where fees were barely affordable. She enrolled them in one of the best private schools in the city, ensuring they had access to quality education, good teachers, and extracurricular activities. Their uniforms were neat, their shoes polished, their bags filled with books and supplies. The neighbors noticed the difference. "Ah, Mama 3's children are looking sharp these days," one woman remarked. "See the car she drives them to school in," another added. God has really changed her story. Ruby smiled at their words but never replied. She wasn't doing it for the neighbors. She was doing it for the children who had once asked why their father gave them so little. She was doing it for the nights she had cried in silence, unable to provide more. At home, Ruby carried herself with grace. She cooked meals, helped with homework, and filled the house with warmth. She no longer begged Ephraim for money or attention. She no longer asked him why he came home late or why his shirts smelled of perfume. She simply let him be. Her silence unsettled him more than her words ever had. Ephraim watched as the woman he had once mocked, once starved of dignity, now flourished before his eyes. He watched as she returned home in her company car, her face glowing, her children clinging to her with pride. He watched as neighbors whispered admiration for her, while his own name became the subject of ridicule. "She is the man of the house now," he overheard one neighbor say. "Her salary is 10 times his. She carries the family." He wasted his chance. The words stung. Ephraim's pride crumbled quietly. He drank more, spent recklessly, and yet nothing eased the gnawing regret that consumed him. One evening, as Ruby sat in the living room helping her eldest child revise for exams, Ephraim staggered in, reeking of alcohol. He paused in the doorway, watching her. For a moment, guilt flickered in his eyes. He remembered the day he had mocked her for asking for wrappers, the nights he had ignored her prayers, the times he had called her an old woman. Now she looked younger than her years, her skin glowing, her laughter ringing again. The children adored her. The neighbors respected her. And he was a stranger in his own home, a man whose presence no longer commanded honor. But Ruby didn't look at him with anger. When her eyes met his, they held no bitterness, only calm indifference. "Welcome," she said softly, then turned back to the children. That simple yes stripped him of power. For in truth, everyone knew who carried the house now. The neighbors whispered openly. If not for Ruby, that family would have collapsed. Ephraim is finished. She is the one keeping them. Each whisper deepened Ephraim's torment. He avoided Ruby's gaze, avoided the children's admiration of her, avoided the truth staring him in the face. He had neglected a good woman, and now he was reaping the fruit of his choices. Ruby, however, refused to dwell on his regret. She lived her life fully, focusing on growth, excellence, and her children's future. She did not retaliate. She did not remind him of his failures. She simply rose above them. One night, after returning from a company dinner, Ruby stood before the mirror in her new home. She wore a flowing gown, her hair styled elegantly, her eyes glowing with peace. For years, the mirror had been her enemy. Now, it was her friend again. She smiled softly at her reflection. "God restored me," she whispered, "and he gave me more than I ever lost." In that moment, Ruby knew her journey wasn't just about her anymore. It was a testimony, for her children, for her neighbors, for every woman who had ever been silenced or neglected. She was living proof that faith and endurance could birth miracles. And though Ephraim sat in the shadows of his regret, Ruby no longer carried bitterness for him. She had risen above. Time has a way of revealing truths that people try to hide. For years, Ephraim lived in denial, convincing himself that Ruby's rise was temporary, that she would stumble eventually, that he could reclaim his role as the head of the home. But as the seasons passed, the reality became undeniable. Ruby had soared far beyond him, and there was no turning back. Ruby's life blossomed. She had long stopped asking her husband for anything. Her salary covered not just her children's education and upkeep, but also the well-being of her extended family. She sent her parents monthly support, something she had once stopped after her struggles began. She gave generously in church, sponsoring projects quietly. Her name carried weight now, not just in her company but in the community. People sought her advice, her mentorship, her kindness. Her children thrived under her wings. The eldest excelled academically, the second showed promise in sports, and the youngest discovered a talent for music. Ruby supported them fully, driving them to competitions, cheering them on, and guiding them with love and discipline. She made sure they lacked nothing, not food, not education, not encouragement. Neighbors now spoke her name with respect. God really lifted her, they said. Look at Ruby now. She is a queen. Ephraim did not know the treasure he had. Ruby heard the whispers but never gloated. She lived quietly, avoiding drama, pouring herself into her work and her children. She still cooked at home, still greeted her neighbors warmly, still tied her scarves on weekends to visit the market personally, even though she could have sent a driver. She remained grounded, proof that success need not change one's character. But Ephraim could not escape the weight of regret. His finances grew weaker. The reckless spending that once made him feel powerful drained him steadily. The women he had wasted money on disappeared the moment his pocket thinned. His colleagues stopped respecting him. Some even mocked him behind his back. In the compound, men who once envied him now pitied him. His wife is the one carrying the family, they whispered. He is nothing now. Those words tormented him. He sat in the living room at night, staring blankly at the wall, drowning in thoughts. Sometimes he tried to start conversations with Ruby, but her calm responses only deepened his shame. She no longer sought validation from him, no longer begged him for anything. She was polite, respectful, but distant. Her life had moved on, while his remained trapped in regret. One evening, after returning from another drinking spree, Ephraim slumped onto the bed beside Ruby. She was reading a document for work, her glasses perched on her nose. "Ruby," he mumbled, "you've changed. You're no longer the woman I married." Ruby looked at him quietly. Her voice was calm, steady. "You're right. I am no longer that woman. I am stronger now." She turned back to her papers, ending the conversation. Ephraim buried his face in his hands, his chest heavy with sorrow. Years rolled by. Ruby grew into a woman of influence, her children flourishing into young adults who admired and cherished her. Her beauty, once dimmed by neglect, matured gracefully. She was respected as a mother, a professional, and a woman of faith. Ephraim, however, aged with bitterness. His hair turned gray, his body weakened from years of stress and drinking. He became a shadow in the home, a man whose presence was tolerated but no longer needed. The final blow came when his eldest child, now preparing for university, looked at him one evening and said, "Daddy, I want to be like Mummy when I grow up." Ephraim's heart shattered. He realized, perhaps too late, that he had wasted the loyalty of a woman who had once been willing to build with him. He had mocked her prayers, dismissed her dreams, squandered his chance. Now she stood tall, and he lived only in regret. Ruby never used her success to shame him. She never rubbed her achievements in his face. She simply lived her life, letting her growth speak for itself. Her silence was her revenge, her success her victory. One Sunday afternoon, after church, Ruby sat on the balcony of her new home, watching her children laugh in the compound. She held a cup of tea in her hand, her face serene. She thought of the years she had suffered, of the tears she had shed, of the prayers she had whispered into the night. "Thank you, Lord," she murmured. "You never forgot me. You gave me more than I asked for." Behind her, Ephraim sat quietly, his eyes hollow, his heart heavy. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to undo the years of neglect. But the words never came. Pride and shame tangled in his throat. He lived in silence, drowning in the knowledge that he had lost what could never be replaced. Ruby smiled faintly, not at him, not for him, but for herself. She had risen, she had endured, she had conquered. Her story was no longer one of suffering, but of triumph.